Aria walked toward the grand music hall with slow steps, holding her thin music folder tightly against her chest. Her hands were slightly cold because she was nervous, but she kept walking because this was the day she had dreamed about since she was a child. The day she would finally play on a real stage. The day she would show the world what she could do, even if nobody believed in her except herself. The music hall looked huge when she reached the front doors, its tall glass windows shining in the sunlight. People were entering in groups, wearing beautiful clothes, expensive dresses, polished shoes, and carrying confident smiles. They looked like they belonged there. Aria looked down at her own simple clothes. A plain shirt, old jeans, and scuffed shoes. Her appearance did not match the others, and she knew it. Still, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. The moment she entered, she felt eyes turning toward her. Some people glanced up and then looked away quickly. Others stared a little longer. Judging her silently, she kept her face calm. Even though her heart felt heavy, she walked forward slowly, trying not to notice how out of place she looked among the rich students and their proud parents. She reminded herself that she was here for her music, not for them. Inside the hall, dozens of young piano students were practicing on side pianos, their fingers moving quickly, their teachers whispering last-minute advice in their ears. The hall echoed with notes of Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin. Everything sounded polished and perfect. Aria felt her stomach twist. These students had private lessons, expensive pianos at home, and years of training. She had none of that. She practiced on a broken keyboard that someone had thrown away. She watched YouTube videos instead of taking lessons, but she loved music more than anything. And love had brought her here. She took a seat near the back, placed her music sheets on her lap, and tried to calm her breathing, but her heart kept beating fast. She heard two girls whispering in front of her. One giggled and said, "Who is she?" "I've never seen her before," the other replied. "Probably someone who will mess up on stage." Their words were quiet, but Aria heard them clearly. She lowered her eyes, not because she was ashamed, but because she did not want them to see the hurt on her face. A tall man wearing a suit walked into the hall next. He looked strict, serious, and proud. Everyone around him seemed to recognize him immediately. He was Mr. Harlan, the well-known American piano teacher. The man whose students always won competitions. The man who believed only trained students could shine. He walked down the row of seats, inspecting students with cold eyes. When his gaze fell on Aria, he paused. His eyebrows raised slightly, not in surprise but in judgment. He walked up to her and asked, "Are you performing today?" His voice sounded sharp, as if her presence itself was confusing to him. Aria nodded and said softly, "Yes, sir." He looked at her clothes, her worn-out shoes, her thin music folder, and the doubt on his face grew even stronger. He leaned closer and said in a cold tone, "You should know this is not a small school event. This is a serious stage. Only skilled players belong here." His words felt like small knives. But Aria stayed calm. She answered politely, "I understand, sir. I will try my best." Mr. Harlan stared at her for a moment, then gave a small disappointed sigh and walked away, as if he had already decided she would fail. Aria watched him leave with quiet eyes. She did not hate him. She had met many teachers like him before, people who judged others without knowing their story, people who believed talent only came from wealth. But Aria had learned something important in her life. Talent grows anywhere, even in broken homes, even in silence, even in pain. She repeated those words in her heart as she waited for her turn. The announcements began soon after. Students were called one by one. Each performance filled the hall with beautiful sounds. The audience clapped politely after every piece. The teachers nodded proudly, and the students bowed with confidence. Aria listened and watched, feeling a mix of fear and excitement rising inside her chest. She knew her turn was coming soon. Finally, she heard her name being announced. The sound hit her like a spark of electricity. Her breath caught for a moment. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling strangely light. She held her music sheets tightly and walked toward the stage. Every step felt long and heavy. People watched her with curious eyes, some whispering again, wondering why someone who looked like her was going to perform on such a grand piano. When she reached the stage stairs, she paused for a brief second and looked out at the crowd. The lights were bright. The hall looked bigger from the stage than from the seats. She swallowed nervously, then climbed the steps one by one. Her heart beat loud in her ears. She approached the piano, a glossy black grand instrument that looked like it belonged in a royal palace. She placed her hand on its surface gently. Feeling its smooth, cold touch for a moment, she forgot her fear. She remembered why she was here, because music was the only place she ever felt truly alive. Aria pulled out the bench, sat down carefully, and placed her trembling fingers over the keys. The whole hall fell silent. Mr. Harlan crossed his arms, waiting for her to fail. The students leaned forward to watch, some with interest, others with mocking smiles. Aria closed her eyes for one long breath, remembering her small room, her broken keyboard, the night she stayed awake practicing, and the dream that brought her here. She lifted her hands slightly, ready to play the first note. The hall braced itself, expecting nothing. But Aria was ready to give them everything. Aria was still sitting on the piano bench when she heard footsteps approaching her from behind. She turned her head slightly and saw Mr. Harlan walking toward her again. His expression cold and sharp like before. His shoes clicked loudly on the wooden stage floor, each step sounding like a reminder that he did not believe in her. Aria kept her hands on the keys, trying not to show the nervousness growing inside her chest. She was ready to start playing, but he stopped her before she could touch the piano. He leaned down, bringing his face closer to her ear so the audience would not hear. And he whispered, "Listen, girl, you do not belong on this stage. This piano is for trained musicians, not for someone who learned at home on a broken keyboard." His voice was low but full of arrogance. He spoke as if he was doing her a favor by stopping her. Aria felt her chest tighten, but she did not move. She stayed still and listened, even though every word felt heavy. She looked down at the keys and took a quiet breath. She wanted to speak, but she did not want to argue. She came here for music, not for fights, Mr. Harlan continued. You will embarrass yourself, and the judges will not be kind to you. It is better if you step down now, save yourself the shame. Just walk away before the performance starts. His voice held no kindness, only judgment. He looked at her like she was a mistake sitting on his precious stage. Aria slowly turned her head toward him and looked into his eyes. Her own eyes calm but hurt. She spoke softly, "Sir, I came here to play. I will try my best. That is all." She did not fight back. She did not raise her voice. She simply said the truth, Mr. Harlan stared at her for a moment, surprised that she was not crying or giving up. He expected her to break, but she didn't. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Do what you want, but remember, I warned you." Then he straightened up and walked away with stiff shoulders. As if her confidence offended him, the audience did not hear his words, but they noticed his expression as he left the stage. His students watched Aria with smug smiles. Some whispered to each other. "She is going to ruin everything," another boy said. "It will be funny to watch her panic." Their laughter was quiet, but cruel. Aria heard some of it, but she kept her focus on the piano. She had heard such things before in her life, whispers that said she was not good enough, voices that tried to break her spirit, but she always held on to her dream. She looked at the grand piano in front of her, its glossy black surface reflecting the bright lights. It looked beautiful and intimidating at the same time. She placed her fingertips gently on the keys, letting their cool touch calm her heart. She closed her eyes for a moment and remembered the long nights she practiced alone, using headphones so she would not disturb anyone, remembering the time she taught herself difficult pieces, even though her keyboard had broken keys, remembering how her fingers learned to feel the rhythm even when no teacher was there to guide her. Those memories gave her strength down in the audience. A few parents noticed Aria's calm posture. One woman whispered, "She looks so young. Is she really going to play?" Another parent replied, "She does not look trained. Maybe she got lost." The hall was full of assumptions, but no one knew the battles Aria had already fought. While Aria prepared herself mentally, Mr. Harlan sat back in his chair, his arms crossed, a cold smirk still on his face. He whispered to the teacher beside him, "This will be over quickly," but the other teacher did not respond. She kept her eyes on Aria with a curious expression. Something about the young girl's calmness made her wonder, at that exact moment. The judge on the left quietly flipped through Aria's registration form. He raised an eyebrow when he saw her choice of music. It was a difficult piece, a piece only advanced players attempted. "Interesting," he muttered under his breath, but kept reading. He did not know whether she was confident or just foolish back on stage. Aria took another slow breath. She straightened her back, moved her hands into position, and tried to ignore the weight of judgment around her. She did not want to think about her clothes, her old shoes, or the teacher who doubted her. She wanted to think only about the music, because music had always been her only safe place. She looked out into the hall for a brief moment. She saw hundreds of faces, some bored, some curious, some waiting to laugh at her, but she also saw one little girl in the front row smiling shyly at her, as if silently cheering for her. That small, innocent smile warmed Aria's heart. She turned back to the piano, let out one final breath, and whispered to herself, "Just play." She touched the first key gently, letting the note ring softly, but before the sound could fully bloom, the hall was already paying attention, because something about her posture, her calmness, and her steady fingers told them this girl was not someone to underestimate. The performance had not truly begun yet, but the room already felt different. Something was about to happen, something nobody expected, something even Mr. Harlan could not stop. Aria was ready to show them who she really was. Even if the world tried to look down on her, she was about to rise, and the hall was moments away from witnessing it. As Aria sat on the piano bench, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, a soft wave of whispers spread across the hall. It started from the row of students in the middle, then moved to the parents, and finally reached the back of the hall. The sound was like distant wind, quiet but full of doubt. Everyone was waiting for her to make a mistake. Some of the students leaned forward with curious eyes, not because they believed in her, but because they expected to see her panic. A boy whispered to his friend, "She looks scared. She might freeze." Another girl smirked and said, "She will probably play the wrong note in the first few seconds." Their words floated through the hall like tiny arrows, but Aria kept her eyes closed. Blocking out everything around her, she took a slow breath, her heart pounding quietly in her chest. She knew people were judging her. She could feel the weight of their doubt pressing on her shoulders. But she also knew something else, something stronger. She knew she had worked harder than anyone here, harder than the polished students with fancy clothes and expensive teachers. She had spent years practicing alone, teaching herself, playing until her hands hurt. She knew she had earned her place on this stage, even if nobody else believed it. Aria opened her eyes for a moment and looked at the hall. The bright lights made everything glow. She saw parents talking behind their hands, students crossing their arms, and teachers watching her like she was a mistake waiting to happen. Her gaze moved slowly, taking in every detail. And then she noticed something surprising. A girl sitting in the front row, maybe 8 years old, was smiling at her. A small, soft smile full of hope. The little girl did not laugh at her, did not whisper. She simply looked at Aria with quiet support. That small moment warmed Aria's heart. It felt like someone believed in her, even if it was just a child she had never met. Aria gave the girl a tiny smile back. Then she turned to the piano again. Her fear was still there, but it felt less heavy now. Behind her, Mr. Harlan watched closely, his arms crossed tightly against his chest. He leaned toward another teacher and whispered, "This will not take long." "She looks nervous already." The other teacher did not respond. She simply kept looking at Aria, her eyes thoughtful. Maybe she sensed something that others could not see. The whispers continued growing. Someone in the back said, "Why is she even here?" Another man muttered, "Did she come from another school?" "She looks lost." Aria heard pieces of their comments, but she pushed them out of her mind. She focused only on her breathing, in and out, slow and steady. She remembered the nights she practiced for hours, the times she cried because she made mistakes, the moments when she thought she would never be good enough. But she also remembered the day she learned her first song by herself, the day she played for her mother, who cried because she had never heard something so beautiful in their small house. She remembered how music saved her during lonely times, and how it made her feel alive when the world felt heavy. She lifted her hands slightly above the keys, preparing to begin, but then she paused again. This time something inside her shifted. She remembered something her grandmother once told her: "When you play music, do not play for applause, play for your heart, and the world will hear you." Those words echoed in her mind now. Giving her strength, the hall waited in silence. The kind of silence that made people hold their breath. Everyone expected her to make a clumsy start, to hit the wrong note, to prove Mr. Harlan right. Even the judges leaned forward, uncertain of what they were about to hear. Aria looked at her music sheet for a second, then slowly closed it. She placed it beside her on the piano. She decided she would not look at it. She knew the piece by heart. She had played it 1,000 times in her mind. She did not need the paper anymore. This act alone made a few people in the audience gasp quietly. Who plays a difficult classical piece by memory? Especially a girl they thought was not trained. Aria lifted her chin, straightened her back, and placed her fingers properly on the keys. The hall grew even quieter. The air felt heavy with anticipation. Mr. Harlan's smirk faded just a little. Something about her posture felt too calm, too confident, for someone who supposedly did not belong. Aria closed her eyes once more, letting all the noise fade from her mind. She imagined her small room, her broken keyboard, the night she played with tears in her eyes, and she let that memory fill her soul with strength. Then, with a gentle movement, she pressed the first key. A soft note echoed through the hall, pure, clear, and full of emotion. The whispers stopped instantly. People leaned forward in surprise, and a sudden stillness filled the room in that moment. Before the real performance had even begun, everyone realized they might have misjudged her. Aria's first note carried something rare, something powerful, and the hall felt it. The girl they looked down on was about to show them who she really was, and the world around her shifted in quiet anticipation. When Aria played her first note, the hall grew completely silent. It was the kind of silence that comes when something unexpected happens, something people are not ready for. The soft sound from the piano floated through the air so beautifully that many people blinked in surprise. They had expected a shaky note, a wrong key, a mistake, but the note was clear. Gentle and full of emotion, Aria did not open her eyes. She kept them closed as her fingers moved slowly to the next keys. She played with a softness that felt like sunlight touching cold water. Each note connected smoothly to the next, like a story being told without words. The hall watched her closely, their earlier whispers fading into complete stillness. A few parents leaned forward, confused by how calm and steady she looked. A boy in the front row stopped tapping his foot and stared at her hand movements. Even the students who had laughed at her a few minutes earlier began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Something did not match their expectations. She was not struggling, she was not lost. She was playing beautifully. Aria's fingers grew more confident with every second. The music grew stronger, her emotions pouring through each note. She remembered practicing the same piece in her small room, sometimes with the light flickering, sometimes while listening to the sounds of traffic outside. She remembered playing when she felt sad, when she felt happy, when she felt lonely. The piano had been her friend in every moment, and now she was sharing that friend with the entire hall. The judges looked up from their papers, their eyes widening slightly. They had heard this classical piece many times before, played by advanced students, often played without emotion. But the way Aria played it was different. It sounded alive, like she was speaking through the piano. One judge whispered, "This girl. She understands the music," his voice full of surprise. He had expected to mark her down quickly, but now he found himself paying close attention. Mr. Harlan, who was sitting with his arms crossed earlier, slowly sat forward, his eyebrows tightening. He stared at Aria with confusion. He knew how difficult this piece was. He had taught it to his top students. Most of them struggled with the timing and expression. Yet here was a girl he had never seen before, playing it with delicate control, her fingers moving like they were made for the piano. "How is she playing like that?" he whispered under his breath, but no one answered him. Everyone was too focused on Aria as the piece continued. Aria's emotions rose like a wave. She played the gentle parts with soft hands, making the hall feel warm and peaceful. Then she moved into the stronger section, her fingers pressing with more force, the sound echoing like thunder rolling across the sky. The audience felt it in their chests, the music growing bigger with every moment. A parent in the third row covered her mouth with her hand, whispering, "This is unbelievable." Another man nodded slowly and said, "She is better than half the students here." Their words were filled with shock. Not jealousy, because sometimes talent is so clear that even jealousy fades, and awe takes its place. Aria still had her eyes closed. She was lost in the music. She did not see the crowd watching her with wide eyes. She did not see the teachers leaning forward. She did not see the little girl in the front row smiling bigger and bigger with every note. Aria only felt the piano, and for that moment, she was free. She moved into the next part of the piece, her fingers flying faster now. The music growing more exciting, the hall felt alive. The audience could feel the emotion rising inside them. Her hands moved across the keys with speed and grace. She made no mistakes, not even one wrong note. Her timing perfect, her expression pure. Someone in the back whispered loudly, "She is a prodigy." And for the first time, no one disagreed. Parents nodded, students stared in silence, and teachers exchanged stunned looks. Even Mr. Harlan felt a strange feeling inside his chest. He felt something he was not used to feeling toward a student he had not trained. He felt respect, mixed with disbelief, mixed with shame for how he had treated her earlier. His smirk was gone completely, replaced by a tight expression he could not hide. Aria played the strongest part of the piece next, her fingers dancing quickly, her passion rising like fire. The hall felt the music pull them in. It was no longer just a performance. It had become an experience, something deep, something unforgettable. People were no longer whispering, no longer judging her appearance or her simple clothes. All that mattered now was the music she created, the pure talent she revealed note by note. As she reached the final section, the hall remained breathless, every eye locked on her, every heart beating with the music she played. She lifted her hands slightly, preparing for the last, most emotional part. And then she delivered it, a soft, beautiful ending, each note falling like raindrops in a quiet night, gentle but full of meaning, full of emotion. When the last note echoed through the hall and faded slowly into silence, nobody moved, nobody breathed, nobody spoke. They were stunned, frozen by what they had just witnessed. The girl they expected to fail had given them one of the most beautiful performances they had ever heard. And in that moment, everything changed. The hall no longer looked at Aria with doubt. They looked at her with pure wonder, and the story was only just beginning. As Aria reached the middle of her performance, something changed in the hall. It happened slowly at first, but then all at once, the atmosphere shifted. It felt like a wave of excitement rushed through the air. People leaned forward in their seats, eyes wide, unable to look away from the girl on the stage. Her fingers moved faster now, the melody rising higher and higher, each note sparkling like light dancing on water. The confidence in her hands grew strong. She played with the passion of someone who had lived through pain and turned it into beauty. The hall felt that passion. It grabbed their hearts and refused to let go. At first, the audience stayed silent, too stunned to react. But then something unexpected happened during one of the most powerful parts of the piece. A sound echoed through the hall. Someone clapped. Just once, sharp and clear, it surprised everyone. The man who clapped quickly lowered his hands, embarrassed, but the excitement had already begun to spread. A woman in the fourth row gasped softly, "My God, she is incredible," a young boy whispered. "How is she playing like that?" Others nodded, their mouths slightly open. They had never seen someone so young play with such emotional strength. Aria's performance felt less like a competition and more like a story she was telling through her fingertips. Then, as the music grew even stronger, the audience forgot the usual rule of staying quiet during a classical performance. They began reacting to every powerful moment. A few people said, "Wow," under their breath. Some leaned forward with hands on their chest, and the little girl in the front row practically glowed with excitement. Her eyes shining like stars, she was completely mesmerized. Even the judges exchanged surprised looks. One judge whispered, "This is not normal for an amateur," another replied quietly. "She plays like she has lived every note," they wrote quickly on their score sheets. But their pens could not keep up with their shock. Then, halfway through the performance, something even more shocking happened. Aria hit a complicated run of notes, a fast, swirling section that even advanced players feared, and she nailed it perfectly. Her hands moved so quickly that some people in the audience leaned back in their seats. Their eyes widening, someone whispered loudly, "No way!" The excitement burst like fire. The hall began to react without thinking. A group of teenagers near the back cheered quietly. Someone clapped again. This time 2 or 3 more joined in. The sound grew louder, and soon, before she even reached the end of the piece, parts of the audience were applauding her while she was still playing. It was not disrespect, it was not impatience. It was pure excitement. They could not hold back anymore. They were witnessing something rare, something magical, something they knew they might never see again. The applause did not distract Aria. She was lost in her music. Her eyes closed, her mind far away. She did not know the crowd was reacting like this. She only felt the piano speaking through her. She felt the keys under her fingers like old friends. She poured her heart into every sound, letting years of quiet dreams explode into the open. Meanwhile, Mr. Harlan stared in disbelief. The smirk he had earlier was gone completely. His jaw tightened as he watched the girl he had dismissed perform beyond anything he imagined. He whispered to himself, This cannot be real." His own students looked at him, waiting for his reaction, but he had no words for the first time. The proud teacher was speechless. The hall grew louder with excitement as Aria continued. Every time the music swelled, someone reacted, gasped, or clapped softly. The energy filled the room like fireworks. Even the walls seemed to shake with emotion. It was no longer a competition. It had become a moment nobody wanted to end. Aria reached another strong part, a section full of power and emotion. Her hands flying faster than ever, the audience leaned forward together as if pulled by an invisible thread. Hearts racing, breaths held, it felt like watching a miracle happen. Like seeing a star being born right in front of them. The more she played, the more the hall erupted with small bursts of applause and excitement. Students whispered, "She's amazing." Parents kept wiping their eyes. Judges looked stunned. And the little girl in the front row had both hands pressed to her mouth in awe. Even people who came to support their own children forgot about the competition for a moment. They just listened, completely caught in the magic Aria created. When Aria hit the final big crescendo, the highest, strongest explosion of sound, the hall reacted again. Not with whispers, but with loud gasps and applause that shook the room. It was not normal, it was not expected, but it was real. The crowd had fallen in love with her music. And Aria, still lost in the melody, still unaware of the storm she created, kept playing with everything she had. She did not know yet that she had already changed every heart in the hall. She did not know she had already won them over. She only knew that for the first time in her life, she felt free, she felt seen. She felt alive on a stage she was never supposed to be on. And the hall's excitement proved that she belonged more than anyone ever believed. When Aria finally reached the last powerful note of her performance, the entire hall fell into a deep, heavy silence. It was not the silence of doubt anymore. It was the silence that comes right before something big happens, a silence full of shock, emotion, and disbelief. The air felt thick, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Then, in the next moment, the whole music hall exploded into applause. The sound burst like thunder, loud and sudden. Parents stood up from their chairs, students dropped their jaws, and the little girl in the front row jumped to her feet, clapping with all her strength. The applause hit the walls and bounced back, filling the room with pure energy. Aria opened her eyes slowly, confused for a second. She had been lost inside the music. She had not noticed the gasps, the whispers, or the small claps that erupted during her performance. She looked around with wide eyes as the applause grew louder and louder. She had never seen so many people clapping for her at once. Her heart felt warm and heavy at the same time. Parents wiped tears from their eyes. Some looked at each other in shock, saying things like, "This girl is special, and I have never heard anything like that." Students who had laughed at her earlier now stared at her with open mouths, unable to believe that the same quiet, simply dressed girl had just played like a young master. Even the judges stood up from their seats. Something they rarely did. One judge said softly, "That was extraordinary," another whispered. "Her expression is beyond her age." They wrote high scores on their sheets without hesitation. But even they knew the numbers could never fully capture what she had just done on stage. But the biggest reaction came from Mr. Harlan. He sat frozen in his seat, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, his arms no longer crossed. He looked like a person who had just discovered something unbelievable. He stared at Aria without blinking, his face slowly turning red. He felt something he had not felt in a long time: deep shame. This was the same girl he had warned, insulted, and looked down on. The same girl he believed would embarrass herself. The same girl he dismissed as ordinary. But now she stood on stage receiving the loudest applause of the entire event. He swallowed hard as he remembered his own harsh words. They echoed inside his mind like a painful reminder. "You do not belong on this stage. You will embarrass yourself. Walk away before you fail." But she had not failed. She had done the opposite. She had proved him wrong in front of the entire hall. As the applause continued, some of Mr. Harlan's own students looked at him with uncomfortable expressions. They knew what he had said to Aria earlier. They had heard his cold tone. Now they watched him struggle to hide his reaction. A parent sitting behind him whispered to another. "Wasn't he the one who doubted her?" The other replied softly. "Well, he was wrong." Their words reached his ears and made his face heat up even more. On the stage, Aria stood up slowly from the bench. She bowed politely, her hands trembling slightly because she had never received such a powerful reaction before. The applause grew even louder when she bowed. She felt tears forming in her eyes. Not sad tears, but tears of relief, happiness, and pride. This was the moment she had dreamed about her whole life. She looked at the audience and saw faces filled with admiration. People smiling kindly at her, some even waving. She saw the little girl in the front row still clapping fiercely, her face bright and excited, and for a moment Aria's heart felt full. She gave the little girl a small grateful nod. The host walked on stage with a stunned smile and said loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, please give another round of applause for Aria." The hall erupted again, the cheers louder than before. Aria felt her knees weaken slightly. She had never imagined she would stand on such a big stage and hear such a sound meant for her. Down below, Mr. Harlan finally stood up, not to clap, but because he felt too overwhelmed to stay seated. He stared at Aria like he was seeing her for the first time. His voice was barely a whisper when he said, How did I not see it?" But the truth was simple. He never cared to look. He judged her before she played. And now he had to face the embarrassment of his mistake. He watched her with a heavy feeling in his chest. A mix of regret, shame, and something he rarely felt: respect. Deep respect for a girl he had doubted. A girl who had just shown the entire hall what true talent looked like. The applause slowly faded, but the admiration remained. Aria stepped off the stage with a soft smile, not knowing that her life had just changed forever. She had walked into the hall as a girl people looked down on, but now she walked out as someone unforgettable. Someone who had touched hundreds of hearts with her music. Someone even the strictest teacher could no longer ignore. This was the moment the hall realized. The girl they underestimated was the one who shined the brightest. And her story was far from over after Aria stepped off the stage. She stood behind the curtains for a moment, trying to understand what had just happened. Her heart was still beating fast, her hands still shaking from the applause. She took a deep breath and slowly walked toward the hallway. She thought everything was finally quiet, but she was wrong. Her life had already started changing outside the stage. Within minutes, people in the audience began pulling out their phones. Videos they secretly recorded during her performance started spreading quickly. Someone uploaded a clip titled, "Young Girl Shocks Entire Hall," another person posted. "You won't believe this performance." The videos spread from one phone to another, then onto social media. Like fire catching dry grass, within an hour, hundreds of people had already shared her performance online. Inside the hall, whispers changed into excited conversations. Parents gathered near the entrance talking loudly, some saying, "Her talent is unbelievable," others shaking their heads in amazement, saying, "Where has she been hiding?" Even students who earlier looked down on her now talked about her with respect. It felt like everyone suddenly wanted to know her name. Aria did not know any of this yet. She was sitting quietly in a small hallway corner, holding her music sheet and trying to calm her breathing. She did not expect anything more to happen. She just felt relieved that she did her best. She did not expect fame or attention. She only wanted to share her music. But her performance was much bigger than she realized. Soon, people started looking for her backstage. A group of students walked around asking, "Where's Aria? We want to talk to her." Even some teachers joined in. One teacher said, "I want to hear her story," another added. Her technique is natural, rare, but Aria remained sitting quietly, unaware that people were searching for her. In the judges' room, the judges discussed her performance with serious faces, but their words were full of excitement. The head judge said, "She is a once-in-a-decade talent." Another judge said. "We must contact the National Academy. They need to know about her." They talked about scholarships, invitations, and opportunities she never imagined for herself. Meanwhile, social media kept exploding. Comments poured in from strangers who had already watched her video. People wrote things like, "She plays with real emotion. This made me cry. And someone give this girl a chance." Even musicians and pianists with large followings started sharing her clip, adding captions like, "Pure talent," and "This girl is special." Aria's name was slowly spreading everywhere. Back inside the hall, Mr. Harlan stood in a quiet corner, his expression troubled. He watched students and teachers talk about Aria with admiration. He overheard someone say, "She might be invited to perform at the state competition," another person said. "Universities will want her." Each comment felt like a needle in his pride. He realized that he had nearly pushed away someone who could become a great musician. His students, who once followed him confidently, now looked unsure. One girl whispered, "Maybe Mr. Harlan was wrong about her," a boy added. "She played better than all of us." Hearing this made Mr. Harlan's stomach twist tightly. He felt embarrassed, guilty, and strangely impressed all at the same time. Aria finally stood up from the hallway chair and walked out slowly. She was surprised to see people gathered around waiting. She froze for a moment, unsure if she had done something wrong. But then a teacher walked up to her with a warm smile and said, "Aria, your performance was beautiful." Others nodded and said things like, "You were amazing, and we want to hear you play again." Aria blinked in shock. She was not used to compliments. She felt a shy smile forming on her face. She thanked them softly, her voice quiet but full of gratitude. She felt her heart warming. She had played music her whole life without being seen. And now suddenly, everyone wanted to hear her. A group of parents approached her next, asking where she learned to play, who taught her, and if she had a teacher. She answered honestly, "I learned by myself." This answer surprised them even more. Their admiration grew deeper. One parent said, "That makes you even more talented." Soon, someone came running toward her with their phone in hand and said, "Aria, your video is going viral." She looked confused and asked, "What do you mean?" The person showed her the video online. Thousands of views already. Hundreds of comments praising her. Aria stared at the screen with disbelief. She never imagined that her music would reach so many people so fast. Word kept spreading across the city, across schools, and across music forums online. She became known as the girl who shocked the whole hall. Invitations started coming in from small local groups and big music academies. People wanted her to perform, to study, to grow. Aria felt overwhelmed but happy. She realized that her life was changing. Not because she looked special, not because she had money or fancy clothes, but because her music had touched people, because her heart had reached theirs through every note she played. And somewhere in the corner of the hall, Mr. Harlan watched her silently, realizing that the world now admired the girl he had doubted. And he knew that he had been proven wrong in the most powerful way possible. By talent, by heart, and by the truth of her music. Aria stepped outside the main hall, hoping to catch a breath of fresh air. Her body still felt light, as if she was walking in a dream. She did not expect anything else to happen. She thought the applause was the end of her story for the day. She stood near the fountain outside the building, holding her music sheets close to her heart. The evening sun touched her face softly. She finally allowed herself to smile. But the world around her was already moving in ways she could not see yet. Inside the building, people were still talking about her performance. Teachers argued about how someone so young could play with such emotion. Judges discussed calling music academies. And students whispered her name like she had become a legend in 1 hour. Aria sat down on a bench, trying to understand everything. She never thought her music would touch so many people. She felt proud, but also a little scared. everything was happening too fast. She had lived most of her life quietly, unnoticed. And now suddenly she was the center of attention. She wondered if she was ready for this new world. While she was lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw Mr. Harlan walking toward her. His steps slow, almost hesitant. He was not the same confident, strict teacher she had seen earlier. His face looked different now, softer, almost nervous. Aria stood up politely, unsure of what he wanted. He stopped in front of her and took a deep breath before speaking. "Aria, I owe you an apology." His voice was quiet, not cold this time. He looked at the ground. Unable to meet her eyes, "I judged you before I heard you play. I assumed you did not belong here, and I was wrong." Aria blinked in surprise. She never expected him to apologize. He was known as a proud man, someone who rarely admitted mistakes. She felt a strange mix of emotions, but mostly she felt calm. She nodded gently and said, "It's okay, sir," her voice soft and sincere. She did not hold anger inside her heart. But Mr. Harlan shook his head. "No, it's not okay. I treated you unfairly." He looked at her now, his eyes filled with guilt. "You have more natural talent than many trained students I have taught. Your performance, it humbled me." Aria looked at him for a moment, and then she smiled kindly. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. She meant it. She had no intention of carrying bitterness. Music had taught her to let emotions flow, not to hold grudges. After a moment of silence, Mr. Harlan took another deep breath and said something she did not expect at all. "Aria, if you are willing, I would like to mentor you personally." His voice was sincere, almost hopeful. "You have a gift that should be guided and protected. I want to help you grow truly." Aria felt stunned. She looked down at her music sheets, thinking about her long journey, practicing alone in her small room, teaching herself through trial and error, dreaming of someone who would one day understand her passion. Now the teacher who once doubted her was offering to teach her himself. For a moment she imagined accepting, imagined learning in a real practice room, having someone experienced guide her. But then she remembered something. She remembered how she learned music by feeling it, not by following strict rules. She remembered how she grew without help, how every mistake shaped her style, her voice, her identity. She lifted her head slowly and said in a soft but clear voice, "Sir, I am grateful, truly, but I want to find my own way." She spoke with gentle confidence. "Music has always been something I learned with my heart. I want to continue that journey by myself." Mr. Harlan felt surprised, but also impressed. He nodded slowly, understanding her words. "I respect that," he said quietly. "You are stronger than I realized." Aria bowed her head politely, and he walked away, carrying with him the heavy lesson of humility. Meanwhile, inside the building, another teacher rushed outside calling her name. "Aria, come quickly," she said, breathless with excitement. Aria stood up, confused. "What happened?" she asked. The teacher smiled widely and showed her a phone screen. Her video had already reached thousands of views. Comments filled the screen, people from all over praising her, some calling her a prodigy, others asking where they could hear her again. Aria covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filling with tears. She never imagined her music would touch strangers she had never seen before. It felt like the world was opening its doors to her. The teacher placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "Your life is about to change, Aria. You're going to places you never dreamed of." Aria looked at the sky. Feeling the cool air brush against her skin, she felt a spark inside her chest. "Not fear, but hope," she whispered softly. "I just wanted someone to hear my heart, and now the world finally had." She walked away from the hall with steady steps. A simple girl with a simple dream, but no longer invisible. The hall that once doubted her had become the place where her new life began. Her story was only beginning, and the world was already waiting for her next note.